Hello everyone, welcome to another Book Review Wednesday, and today I am going to be briefly discussing The Man in the Iron Mask by Alexandre Dumas, or Dumas. I apologize, I'm not good at French, and I don't know when you do pronounce the S and when you don't, or do, so I don't know. But without further ado, let me discuss this follow-up book to the Three Musketeers that was written by the same author. In order to discuss this book, I'm going to have to discuss the first installment, Three Musketeers, and sort of compare and contrast the two, because I think this one actually offers something rather unique compared to what the initial Three Musketeers book was presenting. So the original Three Musketeers book was mainly and purely focused on being very youthful. And what I mean by youthful is that it's more fantasy oriented, it's more about good versus evil, justice versus injustice, all for one and one for all. The Musketeers are fairly young compared to their ages within the follow-up book, so they have a lot of strength and they can, fight off bad guys and basically win the day and serve the king or monarch that is in charge. And that was how it was basically presented. It's sort of like a blockbuster film. It's very fantasy oriented. There's good versus evil. It's a lot like superhero movies or adventure movies like Pirates of the Caribbean. It has that kind of swashbuckling aspect to it, with sword fighting and cannon fire and all that stuff. So there is a lot of fantasy and a lot of energy in the first book, and it's primarily focused on the Musketeers when they were younger men. In this book, they're a lot older men. They've aged significantly from the previous installment. It primarily focuses on them, all four of them. Again, Porthos, Athos, Armias, Aramis, and I'm not going to even try to pronounce the other person's name. I'm so sorry. I'm horrible at French, but it starts with a D, but I'm not gonna try to pronounce it because I'm just really bad at pronouncing these names. But basically, it focuses on the four Musketeers again, and basically we see in the beginning how one of the Musketeers really sort of sets the stage as to the plot. The Musketeer, Aramis, he basically ends up going to this prison where he discovers that the twin brother of the king is residing there, and he's a prisoner. And you might be wondering, why is he a prisoner? Well, the reason why the twin brother of the king is a prisoner is because since they were born twins, and since they are both male, the father of these two future kings, was afraid that one of the sons would be very jealous of the other son if the other son took over and became king. And he thought that this would lead to a lot of problems. And as a result, he decided that he's going to lock one of his own kids away. Basically, that's the conclusion that they come to. And the wife's totally cool with it. Yeah, okay, go and lock up one of my kids, no problem, for the rest of their life, and they won't really know who they are. Yeah, go ahead, do it. No problems, no worries. So basically, that's what ends up happening to one of the twins. And when Aramis discovers this, he he decides that it is best if this twin, who has been locked up all his life, if he be set free and take the place of the current king. Now, the current king is sort of described as fairly arrogant and really full of himself. Again, I don't think he's as maybe one-dimensional as the movie starring Leonardo DiCaprio, because again, we had The Man in the Iron Mask, the movie with Leonardo DiCaprio. I don't think this king is as one-dimensional as Leo was, and again, I'm talking about the bad king. So yeah, even though he's I guess not as bad. I mean, he's pretty bad if one of the Musketeers is like, hey, we should get rid of him. We should place him with this guy. So Aramis basically conducts this whole plan, this whole scheme, in order to get the brothers switched. And this is really what sets the stage for the plot. And then you will see how the other Musketeers sort of follow suit and become sort of a part of this plot. There's a lot of other side plots to this story. They might be distracting, so I'm really not going to go into them all that much because, again, that's sort of spoiling it. And I don't think that's really the main focus of the story. The main focus is really the title of the book. Although I will say that the way this plot and the story is set up is a lot different from, again, like I said, the Three Musketeers. It doesn't follow sort of the good versus evil narrative. It's not really, I think, centered wholly on the idea of justice like in the first book. It's a lot more, I think, based in rationale and more focused in on reality. And you will see how the political intrigue within this book sort of impacts and makes things a lot more complicated than they really were in the first story. Because you will see how certain things tie in and how things ultimately don't follow through as really planned. So really, it's designed to be a very different approach. And it kind of makes sense into the extent of how something like this would probably play out. So it's very interesting in that respect. And again, this plot really does go in a certain different direction than the first installment does in regards to how it sort of sets up the plan and what ultimately ends up resulting from the plan. So that's really the heart of the story for the most part, with these little side plots here and there going on. And the interesting thing too is that since technically four Musketeers are a lot older, they're in different stages of life, and they are dealing with the impacts of older age, and you'll see how this sort of has an impact on them. And there is actually a lot of tragedy that happens within the story. Again, it doesn't have, this plot is not very sunshine, roses, and seizing the glory at the end. It's really a reflection on sort of life. And I think the two books sort of encompass that. You know, you have the Three Musketeers, which was more about childhood and youth, and then you have The Man in the Iron Mask, which is more about adulthood and old age. And that's really what is the centerpiece of what I think Alexander was trying to present. And I think it really works because, again, it's offering us something different. It's not offering us something the same. And that's what I really enjoy about these two works. Unlike other classic books like Jane Austen, that focus primarily on trying to reiterate the same points over and over again, just within different, just with different characters. These two books focus on completely different things, and I find that fascinating. Even though it's the same characters that we know and love, they're put into different circumstances that aren't really the same. They're not different. They're not um, they are different. They're dealing with a different. They're at a different stage in life. They're dealing with different characters too. For example, one of the Musketeers has a son, and you'll see how the son has this sort of side plot romance with or affection for this one woman who ends up being the king's mistress and doesn't really care for him because she's got the king. And I've noticed something too in these books, which I actually find as a woman pretty hilarious. I like how all the women are pretty much all vain, and they're just completely all full of themselves, and just like they're just all in it for the money, and just it's just unbelievable. I just find it so amusing. Just how, wow, oh, okay, there's really no good female characters here, except I guess the one you could say in the first Musketeers book, but really, the females in this book are very, very self-centered and completely, attention seekers, and they're, you can really tell that that's kind of what the author was going for, I think, because that's how most of the women in the books are presented. And personally, as a woman, I don't find it offensive. I find it hilarious. But that's really how ultimately this love plays out, because she ultimately rejects him because the king's got more dough than he does, and he's really bummed out and he's really sad about this, and you'll see how this affects Athos, because Athos is the father, and he's very I believe the father is Athos. Sure, it's Athos, yeah. That's something that's very important, I think, to emphasize within the story, because I think it's the biggest side plot that's given the most attention. So again, you'll see how that really impacts the story and the characters. So again, it sort of has these similar elements but with different outcomes, because again, there's different things that happen as a result of this plot. There's a lot of tragedy that ends up happening, and again, it's not like sunshine and rainbows at the end of the tunnel. It's pretty grim, sort of, at the end of the tunnel of the story. There is some positive aspects, but for the most part, it really just hammers you on the head of life has to end at some point, and that's really, I think, what this book was trying to do, because you really do see the age factor really impact the Musketeers, and you see how the story that they're going through is not the same as it was in their youth. So it's very interesting. I think it's a great idea for a follow-up to this story. Does it have flaws, and does it meander a lot? Yes, I think it does. Yes, I think there could be things that could have been cut out and we wouldn't have cared either way. But again, there's a lot of things that are involved within this plot, and there's a lot of different things that, again, even after reading the book, I still had to kind of research and go, okay, this is what was happening here and there. So again, it is that kind of story where there's just a lot of different things going on, and then there's not a huge amount of focus. But again, the major plot is really the title of the story, The Man in the Iron Mask. And you'll sort of see that the ending of this story and the sort of conclusions are really not what you would expect out of something like the Three Musketeers, because we usually think of the Three Musketeers as something very glorious and fun and, action-packed. Even though this is action-packed, it has its action scenes. It doesn't really focus on sort of the triumph of those scenes, but rather the tragedy. And there is death in this book. Death is a big part of this story. Whereas the first story was a lot more about life and youth and defeating foes. This is more of about the impacts of death, and how these strong friendships that they formed over the years, the Musketeers, impacts them when the crypt keeper comes a knocking. And I'm not going to say who lives and who dies, because again, that's spoiling it. But I will say that that it does revolve around these kinds of concepts. So if you are more of a fan of, the swashbuckling Three Musketeers and them winning and them seizing glory and recognition, then I'd say stick to the first book. However, if you like this change, if you like this sort of shift into something that's maybe a little bit more adult, then I think you would like this book, The Man in the Iron Mask, too. And again, this is what I like the difference. I like that there is a book that is more focused on the empowerment of youth, and also a book that focuses more on the realities of age and of old age and death. So this is really what this book intends to focus on, at least in my opinion. But I think that's really all I can say. If there are any questions, comments, concerns, I'd be more than happy to answer them. But thank you all so much for watching. I think that's really ultimately all I can really say about the book without really giving anything away. And yeah, if you feel that that this is something you would like to pick up from your local library or wherever, I would suggest you do so, because I think it's definitely worth your time. But I think that's all I can really say. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you all have a great day, week, month, and year. And I hope to see you all in the next video. Take care. Bye-bye.